Hi, I'm Reed, this is Crowland Publishing. Welcome back to another lore video in which we take notions and ideas from folklore, mythology, social custom, history, wherever, and make them gameable. And we're right in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis, so let's talk about plague doctors. So Europe has been dealing with plague, and specifically the bubonic plague, for a very long time. First outbreak that we know about was in the Eastern Roman Empire in about 500, 600 AD. Killed a lot of people. Keeps coming back until the 1300s, and that's when the Black Death comes. And that's the bad one. That's the wipe out millions of people one. That's the plague. Ring a rosy, bring out your dead, all that sort of stuff. Now, the Black Death had a few side effects, and one of which was that doctors became specialty contractors. And instead of being weird fringe figures in culture and in society, they became more important. And they also got the rights to do autopsies, which was a huge, big revolution in medical science, even though they wouldn't have talked about it in those terms. So you've basically got the very faint fumblings towards an actual doctor class. And plagues come and go, but then the 1600s, the 17th century turns up, and it's post the Renaissance, so you've got far more natural philosophy to draw on. So by the time the plague hits Naples in 1630, quite a virulent one, there's a much stronger body of knowledge. But they do what they usually do. They set up lazarettos, quarantine stations, because they know that somehow it's in the air. So they need to keep people quarantined. They need to keep people from passing it on to other people. But this time, there's a man in town called Charles de Lorme. Now, de Lorme would eventually go on to become a doctor to kings. He's very, very famous. And he's very sensible. He seems to have been quite clever about noting down what he's seen and observing quite well. And you've got to remember that he doesn't know what a germ is, but he does seem to understand that breath somehow carries the plague. So he invents what he calls the Medico della Peste, doctor's outfit. It's waxed goat skin, Moroccan leather, often tanned goat, heavy leather gloves, and underneath just regular 17th century clothes. The broad hats are there just because, much like robes, wearing a broad hat was a way to signify that you're a doctor, that you're a learned person. And the famous masks themselves, when they're a respirator, they're about a foot long, about 30 centimeters long, and they're filled with aromatic herbs for two reasons. The first is that they believed in miasma theory. They believed that the plague was somehow in the air, and that good smelling herbs would cancel out the evil smells, which would bring the plague itself. And the second is very simple. Ever smelled a dead body? Ever smelled 1,000 dead bodies? It was stinky, disgusting work, and they needed something to help them get through the shifts. And maybe it was effective, maybe it wasn't, I couldn't tell you. Probably not, but it was in use for about 150 years until much better scientific theories came along, and the plague itself had become much less of a threat. But the reason it becomes such a cultural icon is because the Venetians use it in their famous masked balls. Now, fascinated with Venice, but that's a whole different video. And the Venetians have a cultural interest and a cultural fascination with masks. It's very important to them. It's in their legal code. The wearing of masks has legal ramifications. And the kinds of masks that you wore was a legal issue. Certain masks were simply not allowed, certain masks were mandatory. And then from there, the plague doctors enter into the commedia dell'arte, which is a kind of art form at the time where you have very stock characters. They have fixed meanings, they look certain ways, and you just recombine their meanings to create a new play. And the plague doctor, shocking to no one, means death. And while we're talking about lore and the folklore and the history stuff, there are two very famous plague doctors who wore the outfit. The first was the famous seer Nostradamus, who it looks like was actually a very, very smart and ahead of his time doctor. And the next was the famous occult scholar and alchemist Paracelsus. If you don't know him, look him up, he's fascinating. And for all you ghoulish fans out there, Paracelsus is almost certainly one of the bases for Baron Frankenstein. Alright, 5 adventures. Number 1, you are hired as a plague doctor. You and your adventuring party. Maybe just one of them is a doctor and the rest are bodyguards, or maybe everyone's in the outfits. Everyone's going to want to wear the outfit. You go into a wild city driven insane by fear and pain. You dodge through or combat hordes of increasingly sick and then maybe mutated beings, and then you find who is causing the plague. Maybe it's just a sinner. Maybe it's an alchemist and it's an experiment gone wild, or a horrible plague demon. But in the medieval times, the plague was often imagined as an old bent over crone, and she had a rake and she was dragging bodies into a pit. And sometimes she was called the Pestehag, the plague hag. And number 2, a plague comes to your town or village or whatever, and you must find a plague doctor, offer them this expensive contract, and then escort them into town. The only problem is that plague doctors were widely considered fearful agents of death. If they creep you out now, think about how much they creeped out people who, when they saw them, they knew, oh bugger, plague is here. Maybe they want to kill this dark, omened figure. It's because the gods will accept a sacrifice. So you've got to keep this guy alive and let him do his healing, while hordes of frightened people who do not deserve to be killed are trying to off him. 3. So there's a few plague doctors in town. They're dealing with the issues. They're helping people out. But the adventurers learn through a tip-off or divination or whatever that one of the plague doctors is actually causing this entire sickness. Maybe it's for evil. Maybe it's a scientific experiment gone wrong. Who knows? So the PCs have to not only track down who this plague doctor is and stop them. If they are found out, they may very well be implicated in trying to actually prevent the cure of the plague going through and prevent doctors doing their work. That would look very, very bad for the PCs. You will be quite alienated by the powers that be in your local city. Number 4, the Dance of Death. It's an allegory for the universality of death and suffering, and you will often see woodcuts and art of dancing skeletons, often in finery, and they're merrily gavoting and dancing and jigging about, and they are leading commoners and kings alike into graves. Death has come for everyone, great and small alike. But what if, because this is D&D, during a regular illness, some terrible entity comes, manifests, and starts casting enchants and charms and everything, and leading people down into the earth, where death awaits them all, and the PCs have to take on what seems to be a Grim Reaper himself. Number 5. More than one city in the world survived a plague, and more than one city of the world just sealed it all away, built on top of it, leaving huge amounts of the dead beneath the ground. Edinburgh is a city like that. There's an ancient city like that in Turkey as well, where hundreds of dead bodies were found. So the PCs, during a time of plague, are put onto undead patrol. They have to go down into the sewers and report back, will the dead rise? Yes, of course they will. And plague doctors become adventurers. They become sort of an order of people who are devoted to protecting the city from what lays beneath, from the ancient spirits of death and pestilence. And during some grand necromantic event, the Black Moon, the rise of the Lich King, whatever, once again, you must go down into the dark, ancient city, and the noble order of the plague doctors must protect the world again. So anyway, there's some ideas about plague doctors. I hope everyone's safe. I'm very worried about everyone. I really hope everyone's going okay. Give us a like. I'm Christian. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.